state to be delivering to you your pension. And if people are dependent on the state, he said they're more likely to be obedient to the state. Or as he put it also, he said, just as every soldier of the Kaiser, of the emperor, receives a pension for his service to the state, every soldier of labor should receive a pension because he is serving the state. But the point of that was to make you a dependent of the state, to create a political dependency. In the United States, some years later, the so-called New Deal, Franklin Roosevelt argued for what he called a second Bill of Rights. The first Bill of Rights, right to freedom of religion, freedom of speech, right to trial by jury, and so on. There was to be a new second Bill of Rights, which would include a wide array of other things. The right to a remunerative job in the industries, shops, farms, or mines of the nation. The right of farmers to raise and sell their products at a return which will give them a decent living. This is the origin of farm subsidies, which have had a generally, I think, very negative impact on the whole world. The right of every family to a decent home, the right to adequate medical care, and so on. That this is a new generation of rights, was his argument. A second Bill of Rights. Not merely the right to freedom and the right to pursuit of happiness, but the right to be given medical care, housing, education, and the like. Similarly, in Germany, the same movement. We demand freedom and bread. It says here in one of the National Socialist posters in Vienna, to the German people of Vienna who are thereby choosing the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And as it says, Hitler pointed out, Germany will be at its greatest when its poorest citizens are its most loyal, because they will be directly dependent on the state for their livelihood. The welfare state in the social democratic approach, less militaristic, less collectivistic, is argued roughly as follows. If rights are a good thing, more is better. Right? If health is good, would you rather have more health or less health? More. If money is good, would you rather have more money or less money? More. Okay? So if rights are a good thing, do you want more rights or fewer rights? In addition, if you have an interest in something, a strong interest, don't you have a right to it? You have a strong interest in being educated, housed, clothed. Isn't that enough to create a right? And then it is the purpose of the state here to dispense rights to the people. A great political theorist, T.H. Marshall, in a series of lectures he gave in 1950, pointed out that there's these new rights that give substance to our social and political life. And he argued, and this is a very common theory you hear today, there are three stages of rights. He said called civil rights, like right to freedom, right to security, right to be treated equally before the laws. He said the liberals, the classical liberals, gave us these rights. Thank you very much, classical liberals. And we identify them with courts of justice. You go to the court to have your rights vindicated. Then political rights, the right to vote. Thank you very much, liberals, for bringing the political rights to the masses of the population. And here he thought of parliament and councils of local government, which I understand is an issue Malaysia Think Tank will be raising up again also, which is local elections. But now he said there's a third generation of rights, social rights or welfare rights. And he said that's the third generation, and these are the rights to share in the social heritage, live the life of a civilized being. And he identified these with the educational system and state social services, namely state delivery of services to people, education, health, income support, state subsidized housing, and so on. So that's a common view. Three generations of rights. The classical liberals gave us civil rights and political rights, and now the welfare state will give us the next generation of rights, which are social rights. That was his view. I don't agree, and I'll explain why. It was internationalized in 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Very interesting document. It's worth reading. The first 21 elements are classical rights in the classical liberal tradition. The right to freedom of speech, the right to exit, the right to property, political participation, freedom of assembly, and so on. But then they change, starting with Article 22. The character changes quite dramatically. Social rights: food, clothing, housing, medical care, rest, leisure, reasonable limitations of working hours, periodic holidays with pay, the right to share in scientific advancement. I never understood what that one meant. It's one of the more vague elements on the list, but it says a human right, the right to share in scientific advancement, and so on. Interestingly enough, this list of rights ends with a unique feature in a list of rights, which is the right to have a duty to obey the state. Article 29. Everyone has duties to the community. By the way, it doesn't mean community, it means the state. It's quite clearly what is involved here, in which alone the free and full development of his personality is possible. So a list of rights ends up with everyone has a duty to the state. Remember I mentioned how the state was made God on earth by this modern thinking. Article 30. Nothing in this declaration may be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or person any right to engage in any activity or to perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms set forth herein. So remember the right to free speech? This suggests if you speak freely in opposition to any of the other elements on the list, you don't have a right to freedom of speech. That may be why the Soviet Union signed this document. Actually, it signed it 5 times, because the Soviet Union had 5 votes in the United Nations at the time. They claimed Ukraine was an independent republic. So they signed it, but of course there was no freedom of speech, no freedom of exit from the Soviet Union. If you tried to leave, they executed you. So we have the final right was the right to have a duty to obey, as you can see here. So let's ask the question. Now I'm going to go to the critical element, which I'll deal with a bit more controversial. Are welfare rights another kind of right, as we're told? Civil rights, political rights, welfare rights, or social rights. Are they human rights? Do they undermine the rule of law? Are they compatible with the very concept of rights? Do welfare rights come into conflict with each other, as well as with other classical rights? And what do welfare rights or social rights say about the relationship of citizens to their government? Now, the classical response, so I'm going to give you the liberal arguments. I'm going to go into full argument mode. I'll tell you more or less what I think, not just describe other views, is that the new rights, so-called rights, undermine the old. They're not compatible with them. We'll start out with, are welfare rights human rights? Because liberals are identified with the idea of human rights. Everyone, every human being, male, female, black, white, tall, short, doesn't matter. They all have equal fundamental human rights. But all social rights or welfare rights stop at the border. They're delineated by border or by national group. So there's a big problem with calling these human rights. So we'll start with a logical syllogism. Major premise. Remember I mentioned the MRI scan, magnetic resonance imaging test. If our major premise is all humans have a right to an MRI scan, minor premise, Mexicans do not have a right to an MRI scan. If a Mexican comes to the American government and says, I'm here for my MRI scan, they say, sorry, you don't have a right. From these two premises, what is the necessary logical conclusion? Mexicans are not human. Right? There's something wrong with this. I know many, many Mexicans. Right? As far as I can tell, they're human. So that can't be right. If these so-called human rights stop at the border, we should ask, are these human rights at all? Something is not right here. It just should set up a little flag that something isn't right with